Okay. So on that note, what's the next the blog books? What are some of the other topics?
The next one is going to be your favorite, Richard. It's called "Don't Be a Feminist: Essays on Genuine Justice." All right, and the subtitle is, of course, a reference to genuine justice as opposed to social justice, or what I in the book call the social injustice movement. The first essay is it is a totally original essay. I actually showed you a draft of it, but the essay is called "Don't Be a Feminist: A Letter to My Daughter." I've thought for many years about talking about feminism with my daughter. She's still only 10 years old, so she's not very interested in this stuff yet. But I said, I want the essay to be ready for the day she asked the question. Right? And I wanted to write it in a way that would be accessible for her, but also give a good review of what I think is the relevant evidence. You know the gist of this essay, but it just starts with, well, what's a feminist anyway? There's the standard definitions you got in Wikipedia. It's just the view that says that men and women should have equal political, economic, social rights. Right. And there I say, look, we've actually got public opinion surveys finding that 95% of all people who deny being feminists agree with that. Therefore, this is a terrible defining trait. It's like saying feminism is the view the sky is blue. It's like, well, that is not what distinguishes you from your viewpoint from other viewpoints. So I propose that the real defining trait of feminism is the view that society treats women less fairly than men. And intuitively, like if you just think about any feminist you've ever met, if you were to say, so do you believe that society treats women less fairly than men? I think you would get about 95% affirmative on that, at least. And on the other hand, out of people who say they are not feminists, I think you get 95% of either, I don't know, maybe somewhat, or just no. Right. So I think this is really the very distinguishing question on being a feminist or not being a feminist. And then from there, I say, all right, well, when we put it that way, then it's really an empirical question of how does our society actually treat men versus women? And there's, of course, a standard list of the ways that society treats women unfairly, supposedly. And I have that list. So, they get paid less, they're doing worse jobs. And then I point out there's also a much less discussed list of ways in which society seems to treat men a lot less fairly than women. Things on child custody or conscription, right? Or the percentage of men who are in prison. And that's one where I'm hoping it will immediately lead readers to say, well, wait a second. Isn't it the case that 90% of people in prison are men because men just commit so much more and much more serious crime? And like, yeah, they do. And once you're willing to admit that kind of argument into this discussion, we are going to apply it to every single one of the complaints and see how well they actually stand up. Right. And so I spent a lot of time going over the evidence on those and just saying in the end, it really doesn't look like there is overall much of a difference in the way that modern Western societies treat men versus women in terms of any plausible measure of overall fairness. And then from there, there's a question like, why do I care so much about my daughter's opinion on this anyway? And that's where I say I do think that having this false view that women are being treated very badly isn't, first of all, bad for the believer. I think it does wind up filling you with antipathy and self-pity. But I say also, I don't want you to be an unfair person. I don't want you to be someone that is blaming other people for what's wrong with your life when it is up to you in order to go and make your life work. And of course, I also don't like the idea of a ideological movement turning you against your father and your brothers who have always taken wonderful care of you, as I'm confident my daughter will agree. Right. So, my daughter's 10, like at least at this age, her view of me is as favorable as I think I deserve. Highly favorable. And sometimes I say now, like when you get a bit older, there's going to be people in school that are going to try to turn you against me and say that your dad is terrible. And she's like, that's ridiculous. And I say, well, I think it's going to happen. And she's like, no, like anyone who says that is terrible. And I'm like, well, you go, girl, but I want to be ready. So that's the lead essay in that book. And then there are a bunch of other pieces that I've written more in the last few years about the way that the so-called diversity inclusion movement works. I have one on the uniformity and exclusion movement, which is, I think, what it is in practice. I have another one that I like quite a lot on just comparing the McCarthy loyalty oaths to the wokeness oaths that schools are trying to impose on professors, and is pointing out that the McCarthy oaths were very mild compared to what they're trying to ram down our throats now.
Oh.
And the McCarthy oaths, all that required is to say that you are not a member of a group that was dedicated to the violent overthrow of the U.S. government. That's all that you had to say. Right? That's what those cases were about. All right. So, the Communist Party USA was such a party. And so you'd have to deny that you were in that party. But there was nothing in those loyalty oaths that would preclude you from just being a philosophical Marxist-Leninist who didn't belong to a group, much less a Marxist or a communist or anything else. It didn't require you to actually sign on to a whole worldview. On the other hand, the kinds of stuff that I get from my university, where they say, anti-racism will be the foundation for every policy, every course, everything that's happening at this university. I'm like, does this mean that you're going to go and edit my syllabus? What's the plan here? So far, nothing's happened. Hopefully, it never happens, but it does make me wonder, are they going to try to go and crush me? And so there's also there's going to be part of that book, the part called Being Beckerian, where I just talk about the work of Gary Becker on discrimination and applications of it to a wide range of social issues, some of which Becker might have even backed away from. But I'm sometimes you feel like you're a better Beckerian than Gary Becker himself, or you're a better advocate of a view than the original person. The original person still is kind of tied to older ways of thinking, but you can say, "No, you've really shown us the way."
There was an interesting article in Forbes in the early 1990s. It was actually written, funnily enough, by Peter Brimlow, the guy who who runs VDare now, and
Alienation, of course.
Yeah, and it's really funny because it was actually a good article. It was about the anti-discrimination laws and their costs on corporate America, and they interviewed Gary Becker, and they asked him a few times, and it just seemed like the tone was like he agreed with Brimlow's anti the civil rights stuff, but he was too afraid to say anything. It really comes out in the art that he really was, you apply Becker, his writings, his principles, and then he just sort of doesn't want to go with it. And then in the article, they're like, oh, a professor who's less afraid is Richard Epstein. And they go into Richard Epstein. Richard Epstein just has his quotes about how terrible and stupid it all is. So it's an interesting article. You could find it online if you're interested.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the first book is about, so this book is about social justice generally. It's interesting because do you treat men and women, do we treat one more fairly than the other? Because it's what you're talking about, statistical discrimination. So that exists, right? Men are treated as more violent. And so if you frame the question, you sort of have to establish whether you think statistical discrimination against individuals based on the group characteristics before you even have this conversation, if that's quote unquote unfairness, right? And you sort of have to set those terms. I don't think it is, but if you do think that's unfair, then I think, okay, you have all these differences. But then even if you do that, you still have to say, well, men are treated also based on their statistical categories. And then it's just sort of weighing the whose statistical discrimination ends up being heard more. But the way I like to look at it is statistical discrimination is fine. We should be okay with it in every circumstance. And if it's we treat one group more criminal than the other, even though there's no crime rate differential, that we could say is an injustice, right? But I think just being discriminated against based on your membership of a group in sort of cost benefit terms, we all do that. I mean, you're a George Mason professor. I'm, a young male. I mean, people are treating us based on our characteristics all the time, and it's just logical. I mean, it's just what rational agents would do and have a right to do.
Right. I mean, I would amend that just a little bit in the sense of, suppose that at a very token cost, you could get the individuating information, and then you wouldn't need to rely upon statistics anymore. And you say, yeah, well, I could actually spend 10 seconds to go and double check this, but I'm just going to go and screw you over because you're a man. Say, all right, that sounds pretty bad. But it's one where you need to be mindful of what would the cost be to this person of actually going and finding out what's going on at the individual level. If it's an enormous cost, then I'd say you're exactly right. It's just unreasonable to expect a person who is walking alone into the scary area of town to say, well, I don't know for sure that this guy's going to attack me, so I better assume not. But on the other hand, if it's one where you can just do a quick Google and say, okay, so now I know what's going on. Of course, with business, we don't really need to moralize about it. Businesses naturally, if they can get the individual information easily, they'd rather do that because they can make more money by spending a little cost on the information, and then they can make an even better decision. I actually do have a piece that's going to be in that Don't Be a Feminist book, specifically on this ethics of statistical discrimination. So I started off with just asking readers when they thought it was okay to do it. And then I gave my view, which is, similar to yours, probably a bit more moderate, although maybe we're actually in agreement about like if there's some token cost that you could do in order to find out the truth, and the person says, well, I just don't feel like it. It's like, well, why not? What's the big deal?
Yeah. Yeah. Although I worry that when we put that burden, we say, okay, we're going to sort of scrutinize this decision to treat men unfairly or to treat women unfairly. We don't do that for everything. Like, we don't say, you treated an elderly person more, differently than, or we do have age discrimination, but whatever. People who wear this color shirts and that color. Once we start questioning like whether people are using the right level of calibration, it's like we are on the road, I think, to, we have to decide on which dimensions we care about. And then we've already made a decision. And I don't think there's any rationality to say, we care about race discrimination, but not height discrimination. To me, it's like, we just have to sort of take our hands off. Otherwise, we're going to be litigating this stuff till the end of time.
Yeah, I mean, you and I are definitely of one mind on the evil of these laws in terms of personal behavior. This is one where, again, you might be worried as soon as you start even judging individual behavior at all, like, even at the level of the norm, that could spiral out of control and turn into the horrible system of discrimination laws that we got. I think that's probably a bit too paranoid. In terms of, like, I mean, in a way, like in all these cases, like I'm just thinking about, introducing someone to a friend and they say, okay, well, I don't want to meet him because he wears a pink shirt. And I'm like, all right, look, dude, what's the big deal? Like he's a cool guy.
Right. Yeah, my level of judgment.
And if someone would say, I don't care if he's a cool guy, like a pink shirt. And, oh, come on, just relax. Get over yourself.